Tonight, Maria's direct hit, devastating Puerto Rico.
The biggest catastrophe in Puerto Rican history.
Evacuate or die.
Puerto Rico es una zona de desastre.
Desastre natural.
Desastre.
I've been reporting on large-scale disasters for 2 decades. Superstorms, wars, economic meltdowns. My focus is less on the fact of these shocks than on how they are so often exploited. How governments, corporations, and investors have learned to take advantage of the desperation and distraction in the aftermath of these events to push through radical policies, privatization, deregulation, and austerity laws that remake societies in the interests of a tiny elite. I saw it happen in Iraq after the U.S. invasion, when the country was treated as a blank canvas for libertarian fantasies, and again in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, when the storm became the excuse to rapidly shut down public schools and public housing and replace them with more profitable alternatives. Even before Hurricane Maria made landfall in September of 2017, many Puerto Ricans worried about another episode of this long story, about how the storm could be used to attack their austerity-starved public services and to snap up damaged beachfront property on the cheap.
As you can imagine, we were all taken by surprise, everyone, at the magnitude of this storm. Initially, in those first couple of days, we felt perhaps this whole business would be wiped out. I can speak to the luxury side, and surprisingly enough, we did not see any loss of interest in the marketplace.
Welcome to Dorado Beaches. We have here a double high ceiling in the living room. Let's see the garden, because the magic of this house is the garden. You see there's a level of sophistication, yet Caribbean flair.
So are you hearing from people who think they can get a good deal in Puerto Rico because of the hurricane?
Absolutely, everybody. We call it pre-Maria, post-Maria.
There's been a lot of talk about disaster capitalism here in Puerto Rico and in many places in the world that have been hit by disasters in recent years. What makes Puerto Rico different?
One of the particularities of Puerto Rico is that this major historic storm occurs on top of an already existing major historic economic crisis. People were already in a kind of state of shock, and severe economic policies were already being applied.
So what are the ways that a crisis like this can be profitable?
As you know, as you've written about, in these moments, a lot of things are suspended, expectations are changed, and so laws can be passed and things can be put into place that would have otherwise not been acceptable. And I think right now the main thing that was already on the horizon is going to be the privatization of public services. So some speculate that part of why the electricity company has been so slow in getting back up is that they're preparing for privatization of all of it. Things also like public transportation system, all of those services that were already weakened, had already been disinvested from by the government because of the financial crisis. It's to be expected that all of them are probably going to be sold, and they'll probably be sold at a very low price, because now they can say, oh, because of Maria, everything is devastated, everything is broken.
It has been the most devastating natural disaster over the last 100 years. So naturally, infrastructure suffered, telecommunications suffered. Now, I believe that can be seen as a silver lining opportunity.
Deseo informarte una de las iniciativas de mayor impacto para la construcción de un nuevo y moderno Puerto Rico: la transformación de nuestro sistema energético. Durante los próximos días comenzará el proceso donde se venderán activos de la AEE a empresas que transformarán el sistema de generación a uno moderno, eficiente y menos costoso para el pueblo.
I met with the governor just after the hurricane, and he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to double down, I'm going to treble down, I'm going to quadruple down, because I believe in Puerto Rico. This is Isla Verde Beach, and to me, this is the finest urban beach in the Western Hemisphere. This is the new pool that we're putting in. We're building a new beach bar and restaurant. You'll see next door there's a new hotel. There'll be another new hotel on the point. Really what the government is doing and has the chance to do is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to repair and rebuild the infrastructure of the island. And if the infrastructure is built well, if the electricity, the roads, the water is taken to 21st century levels, that can only help us all.
The big question hanging over the reconstruction is this: who is Puerto Rico for? Is it for Puerto Ricans, or is it for outside investors and tourists? And after a collective trauma like Hurricane Maria, who has the right to make these fateful decisions? Because many Puerto Ricans have their own ideas about how to replace their shattered infrastructure. And it isn't about selling it off for profit. It's about reimagining how the island generates energy, feeds itself, teaches its kids, and heals its sick. A people's recovery. And like the shock doctrine, it was already underway before Maria.
Casa Pueblo is a community-based organization with 38 years of history defending our national territory. We have a commitment towards sustainable development. Solar power is our first and sole energy source. We were just a few in 1999 when we started with solar power. And all of a sudden, Casa Pueblo after the hurricane was still running. Hello. So people came here right after the hurricane to recharge their equipment. People came here with equipment for respiratory therapy. This was an energy oasis for the community. Immediately after the hurricane, we distributed over 10,000 solar lamps to improve quality of life for the people. Now we have houses asking us for support, and we want to help people unplug from the grid, from fossil fuel. We should embrace a transition to clean energy sources. Solar is one. We have plenty of wind, we have water power, we have plenty of biomass that can be used as a source of energy to run our country. And I think Casa Pueblo, what we're doing is not waiting for the government, not waiting for the US Congress. There's a resistance from everywhere. So we're gonna do whatever is at reach to change that landscape and to tell the people of Puerto Rico that a different future is possible.
Welcome to our farm. Here we are in Orocovis, the center of the island. It's beautiful work.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
It is.
And it's green.
It's green, yeah.
We'd heard that there had been so much damage to the forest, but 4
Well,
months later...
Well, it was like a fire. Like a fire had passed. But now well, we're in shape.
In the history of Puerto Rico became a U.S. colony in 1898. During the 40s, there was a very strong push to get people out of poverty. And poverty became directly equated with being peasant, with being a farmer. So the idea was to break down rural communities, get people to the cities, get them in cement homes, and at the same time, see how we could benefit or how the U.S. could benefit from Puerto Rican production of goods that were consumed in the U.S. They start pushing large-scale coffee plantations, large-scale sugar plantations.
Puerto Rico has this situation that in terms of food security, we're very insecure because we import a lot of food. More than 80% of our food comes from abroad, right? By the port of San Juan. And we've always been saying within our movement that that's a problem, right? Because of climate change, right? We can have something happen with that port and then we'll be doomed.
Maria highlighted that within a night. The next night, we didn't have food, we didn't have water, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have anything. A lot of conventional farmers right now are starving. Even though they have amazing amount of land, they didn't have anything to harvest because they had followed the Department of Agriculture's instructions for monocultures of coffee, whereas before, traditional agroecological farm would be intercropped with oranges, with bananas, with plantains, and that provides for your family. That next day, agroecological farmers were back to the land. We had farmers already ready to sell at the markets.
We can feed the people with sustainable practices that do not harm the environment, that promote resilience within the farm and within the community. We knew that was possible even before Maria, and this is a moment for us to reflect and also make it more visible.
Tell us what you're doing. Ahora mismo acabamos de cosechar
y trajimos lo que cosechamos para pecotar la vaina y las semillas. Y llevarlo a la casa, mi mamá las puede hacer, se las paso a mi abuela. Y mi mamá se quita, como quien dice, esa preocupación de tener que pensar qué le voy a hacer a mis hijas para comer. Ahora mismo muchas personas tienen situaciones en sus casas y cuando no tengan que comer, pues aquí lo tienen, la tierra se los provee sin ninguna necesidad.
What's it like to go to school where there's this very special farm?
Wow, eso no hay palabras para describirlo porque esta clase es como llegar a otro mundo. Siempre estoy conectada con la tierra, cuando yo trabajo en ella siento como si la tocara y ella me tirara un lazo entre sí para conectarse con la humanidad.
Arturo's solar oasis, Dalma's farm school. These places feel a little bit like stepping through portals to another world, to a parallel Puerto Rico, where with little more than local knowledge and the island's famous sunshine, people have been able to power and feed their communities. But these are tiny islands of functionality in a sea of desperation, where families are still living without electricity or running water. Though Dalma's farm rebounded from Hurricane Maria in no time, the adjacent school was closed for 2 months and still lacks electricity.
It's important for the school to open because then kids need food, water, and people who share with them about their experience. The only problem is the light. We don't have light yet. The light of the sun only.
Many Puerto Ricans fear that the slowness to reopen schools, like the failure to get the lights back on, is part of a plan to radically remake the school system, to shut down more than 300 schools and privatize many of the ones that are left. It's a project that predates Maria, but when the storm hit, Puerto Rico's Secretary of Education moved it into fast forward.
You would imagine a secretary having some kind of sensibility towards our population and saying, let's open the schools, let's comfort their children, let's bring the teachers back, let's get them to talk to the peers. But that's not what happened. Immediately after the hurricane, the first thing she says is, this hurricane gives me the perfect opportunity to do the reform that I wanted to do that was not able to. We learned from the experience of Katrina what she was talking about.
Esta mano derecha en la escuela que fue cerrada, déjame subir y bajar. Los padres tienen un cartel con un mensaje para la Secretaría de Educación y para la comunidad exigiendo que no se permita, porque esa escuela se le fue, todo eso se le fue completo, el techo completo, y conseguimos los donativos, compramos las planchas y las montamos y la escuela está abierta.
Ahora mismo aquí vinieron, aquí hay muchos contratistas y me dijeron, mira, nosotros estamos dispuestos, los mismos comercios, de venir e instalar. Entonces un momento dado yo se lo dije a la directora. Entonces me dijo, no, que aquí no permiten que entre ningún padre a tocar por los seguros, que se representa pública.
Todas las escuelas que nosotros hemos reconstruido en Busta.
Entonces, es una excusa
para cerrarla. Y el gobierno, como yo te dije, el gobierno apuesta al cansancio, que somos de carne y hueso y que el ser humano se desgasta y se desanima. Y nuestro trabajo es darle ánimo a la gente para que sepan que es posible revertirlo, si creemos en nosotros.
Hace unos días les comuniqué nuestra decisión de transformar la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica. El camino hacia la transformación no se detiene. Hoy damos inicio a una profunda transformación de la educación. Estaremos implementando las escuelas alianzas, conocidas en algunas jurisdicciones como charter schools.
If there's something wonderful about the people of Puerto Rico, is that even though most of them lost their homes, even though a lot of them had no food, a lot of the people, they fought for the schools.
La educación no es un negocio y nosotros vamos a defenderla, cueste lo que nos cueste.
On my last day in Puerto Rico, I visited Humacao, one of the hardest hit parts of the island. It was for a gathering of several hundred organizers and intellectuals from across Puerto Rico, and a few visitors from further afield. It was billed as a people summit against disaster capitalism and for other worlds.
En ese momento, entonces, cuando todo el mundo está preocupado por sobrevivir, por buscar agua, por ver cómo no está cobrando, por ver cómo consigue alimentos, en esos momentos entonces se plantea como la única solución ante el desastre, entonces privatizar, cortarnos nuestros derechos, se establece un estado de excepción que entonces permite pasar todas estas medidas poco populares en un momento en que la población no tiene la fuerza, o ellos piensan que no tenemos la fuerza para reaccionar debidamente y a tiempo a estas situaciones.
It's the first time movements have gathered across such a broad spectrum since Maria changed everything. And it builds on a proud history of resistance, from the independence movement to the anti-austerity and anti-debt uprising that peaked in the months before Hurricane Maria.
Nosotros lo que nos mueve al centro de todo es la pregunta, ¿qué es lo que nos hace feliz? Y esa pregunta nos guía porque la forma más importante de nosotros poder presentar una alternativa a lo que estamos viviendo es una alternativa que en la raíz esté la felicidad.
I think my dream, and I think about this all the time, is that there's going to be a network of communities that are building locally, that are creating these economies, these industries based on food, based on energy regeneration, that through this crisis the Puerto Rican people realize that they actually know what the solutions are and are able to operationalize them.
But many here in Humacao are convinced that if the post-disaster gold rush is allowed to continue unchecked, it will foreclose on these kinds of bold solutions. Land is scarce in Puerto Rico, and if it all gets snapped up for more office towers, hotels, golf courses, and mansions, there won't be any left for traditional farms and renewable energy projects. For now, these two very different visions of the future are advancing in their own parallel worlds, one on the backs of shocks, the other in spite of them. But both are gaining power fast, and in the high-stakes months to come, collision is inevitable.
Venenos tus monólogos, tus discursos incoloros. No ves que no estamos solos, millones de polo a polo, al son de un solo coro. Marcharemos con el tono, con la convicción que basta de robo. Tu estado de control, tu trono podrido de oro, tu política y tu riqueza y tu tesoro. No, la hora sonó, no permitiremos más tu doctrina del shock. La hora sonó,